Chapter 2 is normally review of the literature, what we call literature review. So in literature review, we are basically talking about what has been written about the area of study. Now, in what you are discussing, somebody must have written something about that field where you base your research from. So it is important that you also capture what other people have written about you. You must read them from books, from the internet, any place, newspapers, etc. Though for an academic study, we don't rely so much on newspaper articles because they're opinionated. They may be biased to some level. So you mostly use academic books or academic work. So in literature review, you go down, break down what has been written about that particular field. You begin from the global perspective, internationally. You narrow down to the continent, and after the continent, you narrow down further to the region or the scope of study where you're conducting this particular research from. So you break it down like that. Remember, literature review is also based on objectives. You must be very clear on what you want in your literature. You just don't gather anything and everything from the literature review and paste it in your work. You could gather so much. You could write another book. So you have to limit it again to the area of concern. Then at the end of the literature review, where we end the literature review, you normally have what we call the theoretical concept or theoretical framework. In the theoretical framework, we are basically discussing about which theories guide your work. Which are the theories that guide your work? We have so many theories about learning. For example, we've discussed about theories of learning, or the theories of Maslow's, Bandura, and other theories. If it's a natural science, social science, you can get them in the field. How do these concepts relate to your the study or the work that you're doing? Then you've got the conceptual framework. Still in chapter 2, conceptual framework, the problem is analyzed in an abstract way to provide a conceptual understanding of it before the data is collected. In basic, we just try to relate some of the factors and how they interrelate from the problem, from the source of the problem to the end in what we call variables. We've got various variables. We've got the dependent variables, we have got the independent variables, we have the constant variables, we have the manipulated variables, But in our level, we just basically, most times use the dependent variables and the independent variables and the manipulated variables and the constant variables for this particular level of study. Then, so that is the conceptual framework. It comes in a diagram format, whereby one factor is linked to the other. The independent variable goes the way to be linked to the dependent variable, and in between we have the constants or the other interfering variables that you have to basically link. So that is chapter number 2. Then we go to chapter number 3. We call it the research methodology. This chapter basically describes on how you did collect your data, how you came up with that particular idea of the data collection, how you collected your data, and what are and how you basically analyzed your data. So the first thing you have is what we call a research design in chapter 3. So that becomes a 3.1. In research design, this is a plan or a strategy for conducting research. The research design is a means of ensuring that the research process is systematic and scientific. It's just basically a plan and strategy. That's what we call a research design. So the first, that's 3.1. 3.2, we discuss about the location of the study or study area. Remember, at the higher levels of academia, could be speaking about masters or PhD, this could come in a chapter in its own, the study area. It could come in chapter number 2 or 3, just after literature review, you could have a study area, which is a chapter on its own. But at low level, diploma level, you could have some of these factors in chapter number 3. So the location of the study area, you basically tell us some of the characteristics of this particular area. Basically things like, where is it situated? What are the longitudes? What are the latitudes? What is the geographical positioning of this area in relation to a country like Kenya? At this particular point, you also attach their map to indicate that this is the particular area. Then you have the population. What is the population of that particular area? In population, remember, we could be discussing about schools. So you are more interested in the number of schools, not necessarily the number of people. If you're discussing about things like child care practices and how they influence children learning. So this is where you could come up with the population of your sub-county. Remember, your area has to be a sample or a case study, a smaller area of the population. So you narrow down to a particular area. Then you have the sampling procedures or sample size. A sample is a small representation of the whole population. So a sample is basically a segment of the entire population, which is to be used to do this particular study. Remember, you've got several types of sampling. You've got the stratified, you've got the systematic, you've got the random, you've got the snowball, you've got the purposive sampling. All those are types of sampling, and there are many more. So in this sample, you just picked a small segment of the population and used to gather your data. If, for example, you're talking about a sub-county like Kamkunji with about maybe 15 ECD schools or 20 ECD schools, you may not necessarily go to all the teachers in all those ECD schools, but you could choose to use a sample of about 8 schools in Kamkunji sub-county of Nairobi. Use 8 ECD schools, whereby you collect your data, you present them, and you use it for your presentation of your project. Then you have got the data collection procedures, that is 3.5. In basically here we are talking about how did you collect your data? Did you use interviews? Did you use questionnaires? Did you use observation? Did you use correspondent? Okay, etc. So you must tell us there, I did a questionnaire. Remember, you also attach the questionnaire at the very end, at the appendix, a sample of the questionnaire. If you used observation, if you used interviews, you'll tell us there. Then 3.6 is the data analysis. Here, you tell us how did you analyze the data. You've collected this number of people having this particular problem. You tell us, it's a brief description of how the researcher intends to analyze the data. The researcher must be conversant with the number of statistical techniques, methods of statistics used must be determined by the objectives, the research questions, the hypothesis, and the research design to be used. So as a researcher, you must be able to analyze this data. At the higher level, we have the descriptive statistics, whereby you use statistical tools to analyze, and especially when you're using correlation, checking the interrelationships between one factor and the other. You can do a correlation. You can analyze between the variables. You can use several statistical analysis tools which are out there to do your analysis of the data. But at this particular level, you can just do a simple analysis of the data. Here we're talking about drawing charts. You can draw pie charts, you can draw bar graphs, you can do histograms, you can do the choropleth maps, you can do the line graphs, you can do the comparative bar graphs, the cumulative bar graphs, just to show us a link between the variables, the dependent variables and the independent variables. So that is chapter number 3. In chapter number 4, you now tell us about the research findings. So this is normally data presentation and analysis, research findings, data analysis and presentation. So here you tell us, my objective number 1 was this. This is what I found out. Objective number 2 was this. This is what I found out. Objective number 3 was this. This is what I found out. And that is now the findings. If you're doing something like effects of poor facilities on children with disability, okay, inadequate facilities. So you tell us that we found that schools did not have a RAM or adequate lifts. This number of schools did not have this. So you can use even the bar graph. Of the 15 schools, 10 did not have this, 5 had this, 2 had this, you know, and then you can present that finding in terms of your objectives. Remember, again, you're guided by your objectives. Then chapter number 5 is normally a summary and conclusions. Summary, conclusions, and recommendations. So here, you basically discuss about summarizing the whole thesis or this whole project work. After conducting all this research, this is my summary. Again, summary has to be very objective in that case. Point 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Then conclusion, and then you also do recommendation. Recommendation is what else can be read about what you've studied. What else can be attached? How more can I read on what you've basically been studying on research? And then after that, you've had your chapter 1, chapter 2. Chapter 1 was introduction. Chapter 2, literature review. Chapter 3, research methodologies. Chapter 4, analysis and findings. Chapter 5, summary, conclusions, and recommendations. Those are the 5 chapters I've mentioned. And in higher educational levels, you could have a chapter 6, but for most cases, you have a chapter 5. So you basically end up by giving your touch. You have what we call the references, the bibliographies, and the references. Here, you have photocopies. You attach things like licenses. If you had a research permit, you do attach it at that particular level. In the bibliographies, you touch and references. Let me begin with references. You identify all the works that you did cite from your project. Now, which book did you read that you did cite or you used? You remember they must go down in alphabetical order from A to Z. You also attach websites and online platforms that you may have used in this particular end. Then you also attach the appendix, the questionnaire that you used, and you also put there budget and a time frame plan. So basically, that's what you need to do in research. Remember, you also constraint of time, so you need to move fast. You need to work within a particular budget. You need to be very systematic in your work. Remember, the most important thing is that you must be very careful about the scope. How big is your area of study? Then, how logical is your topic? How can you collect that data? In most cases, when you go to the field, you may find that whatever you wanted, it may not even be there. It can always change. It's not a sin. Whatever you're going to study, somebody else has studied it before, or somebody else intends to study it, or has studied it somewhere. So it's very important that you realize that. So thank you.